All in favor? 10. All opposed? Any abstain? With the motion 10-0-0, passes. So 20 and 22 are now striked out. So moving on to President Pro Tempore Lee.
When you go do one by one, right?
Yeah. It's still right. It's still nice. Okay, so with the enactments, as we already previously mentioned, we need to go over one by one.
Right.
And then we all need to discuss.
Okay.
Okay.
Call for it.
And then if you will, did you want the votes to be recorded?
For each section or each
No.
type?
I think we can discuss every single section and then make a vote at the very end. I meant to just with regarding any legislations, do we want to?
Yeah, all votes are recorded at the end of the legislation.
At the end of the legislation.
Every legislation has been recorded.
Yeah. But specifically how people vote.
No. Does it
Okay.
have to be?
If that
Up to y'all, but if you do want to do it, we need a motion to technically to follow the rules.
Isn't that a part of a specific piece of legislation to make sure everyone's recorded?
It's tabled by the
Yeah, it
vote.
hasn't-
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if it hasn't passed, you can't
You
do
still
it.
need a
Yeah.
motion because it hasn't passed.
To make it official, it has to be a motion that you all do.
Yeah.
Yes.
According to our current bylaws.
So can you be more specific because the votes are currently recorded?
That individual Senate votes be recorded.
So there's a motion on the table that senators' votes are taken into account when passing legislation.
Is it just for like tonight?
It's for the
So
Senate.
it's
the
for tonight,
the
yes.
accessibility for the.
It's for tonight until, so if that specific legislation does not come back and be passed next week, you all would have to continue doing this every single week. Does that make sense?
Because it's a brand new whole change rather than like a little 1 or 2 or 3 change.
That's what I'm saying, like before, you can't do it until it's fully solidified. But it's fine.
No.
In our bylaws, we could do it if we have a motion on the floor to do it.
Okay.
That's the only reason we.
Does that make sense?
I second.
Okay, there's a motion on the table, there's a second. Are there any questions? Can we move this into vote? All in favor? All opposed? Any abstain? I'm sorry, I didn't see what you voted. Okay, so 8-0-2. Motion passes. Moving on to enactment of the legislative process.
So, to background, the purpose of the legislation is to replace the current chapter X1X, which is the regulation of resolutions, which will be expanded to bills and along with resolutions as prescribed in the purpose of proposed legislation. So do we need to go through the old bylaw?
Yeah, you all technically should have read it by this point, so we can trust that you all did.
Okay. Well, regardless the elements of this legislation, this taken from the old bylaw. Since the old bylaw, they talk about the regulation of resolutions, but however not bills. So with this, we can just go down to the first section, which is the establishments. So basically, the establishment shows what is the bill. So this bylaw governs the legislative process.
Oh, not explaining, you actually have to read it.
Okay. So section 1, establishment. This chapter shall govern the ASUCR legislative process for all Senate legislations, including bills and resolutions. Section B. The legislative process is a procedural process that ensures all proposed legislation follows correct formatting and proper submission to the Senate.
Okay. Any discussions or amendments to the section? Moving on, proceed.
Nothing in this part can change.
Huh?
Sorry, nothing in this part can change.
Oh no, there's some change. Because the old one talked about only resolutions. I guess they did combine somehow resolutions and bills the same. However, this time it's more specific and it's expanded or defines each what is a resolution and what is a bill.
Yes.
Section. Definition.
Oh my God. Okay, sorry, got it.
All legislation passed by the Senate shall be installed in ASUCR bill or an ASUCR resolution, and shall be defined as follows. An ASUCR bill shall be defined as an amendment to the current ASUCR bylaws, an enactment of a proposed bylaw, or a proposed for a constitutional ASUCR resolution shall be defined as an expression of a non-binding position of consent.
Any amendments or questions here? Moving on to the next section. We can do this after.
Okay. Section 4 is the introduction of a legislation.
Wait, where's section 3? 3?
Oh, yeah, change that.
Okay. We'll just continue on. Section 3, introduction. Oh my goodness gracious. I'm so sorry. Oh, don't.
So, introduction. Any members of ASUCR, as defined by Article 1, Section B of ASUCR Constitution, may draft a bill. All drafted legislation shall be introduced by at least one voting member of the Senate, in which becomes the sponsor of the legislation. The drafted legislation shall be submitted to the President Pro Tempore at least 48 hours in advance of a legislative review committee. For drafted legislation to be considered by the legislative review committee, the following must be completed prior to submission. Name of primary author. Name of secondary author. Secondary author shall be optional. Name of sponsor. Any legislation written by a senator does not require an additional sponsor. Title of legislation. Legislation content. For an ASUCR bill, the background shall be included, describe the reasons for, and quotas. For an amendment or enactment along with proposed change. For an ASUCR resolution, the content shall be finalized and well written. Section 5. Actually, sorry. Go on.
Personal privilege?
Yes.
A.
Is there any amendments or questions? Yes. Nope, proceeding.
See you. Section 4. Committee action. In the absence of the primary authors or sponsors, the President Pro Tempore shall present the drafted legislation to the Legislative Review Committee on their behalf. The Legislative Review Committee shall consider the drafted legislation by debate prior to voting. Any minor amendments that does not alter its meaning, such as fixation of typographical errors or grammatical errors, shall be amended. Any majority amendments that does alter its meaning shall be tabled, and the primary author and sponsor shall be notified by the President Pro Tempore. The drafted legislation shall be tabled until the suggested amendments are amended. The President Pro Tempore or designated committee member shall record the legislative introduction date, all committee actions, and date, and vote. The legislation must receive a majority vote in the Legislative Review Committee prior to introducing to the Senate.
Any amendments or questions? Moving on to the next section.
Section 5, Senate action. The President Pro Tempore shall present the drafted legislation to the Senate or yield time to the primary authors and sponsors. The Senate shall consider the drafted legislation by voting prior to, by debate prior to voting. The amendment process in the Legislative Review Committee shall be the same as the Senate meeting. The Senate Secretary shall record the Senate actions and date and vote count. The legislation must receive a minimum required votes from the Senate prior to receiving the signature from the President. Should be Executive Vice President.
Should be where? The
Signature from the Executive Vice President. Section.
Here, from the executive vice president.
Correct. You didn't pull that one down? Okay. Section 6. Final actions. Executive Vice President has 48 hours to sign the legislation to verify the Senate approval with the statutory minimum number of votes. Any legislation not signed within 48 hours will automatically be ineffective. The Executive Cabinet has 7 days to veto a bill in pursuance to Article 4, Section F of the Constitution. The Executive Cabinet cannot veto the legislation if the legislation receives a unanimous vote from the Senate. The Senate has 14 days instead of half the 14 days. The Senate has 14 days to override the veto with a unanimous vote upon receiving a veto from the Executive Cabinet. All members that voted on the legislation shall required to be present during the veto override discussion and voting. The Senate Secretary shall submit the legislation to the ASUCR Executive Director and ASUCR Webmaster. The ASUCR Executive Director shall amend or enact in accordance to the newly passed legislation. The ASUCR Webmaster shall post the newly passed legislation on the official ASUCR website. Do you mind changing section 6B line 1 of line 2 where it said Senate has the 14 days to Senate has 14 days? Section
Is there
7.
any discussion or amendments? No, proceed.
Section 7, limitations. The proposed legislation cannot supersede ASUCR Constitution and bylaws unless previously amended between the following proper procedures. And that's Senate Bill W1706.
Sorry. Any amendments? Nope. Moving forward. Any discussion?
I move to approve Senate Bill. Oh.
So, okay, it is, I move to, you can just read it off here. So, the reason why we're doing this is because we're following the Robert's Rules of Order, and that's how it is when it comes to enactments of bylaws or revisions of bylaws that affects the majority of it.
The majority of the bylaws.
Okay, right here, the line drawing. So I move to approve the adoption.
Okay. I move to approve the adoption of proposed bylaw as a substitute for Chapter X1X, the consents bylaws. Regulations of resolutions.
Regulations. Okay, got it. Okay, is there a second? Seconded by Senator Young. All in favor? So please have your hands out. All in favor? Thank you. Perfect. All opposed? All abstain? 11-0-0, motion passes. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is Senate Bill 017, enactment of meeting attendance regulations.
Sorry, buddy. You guys did this one day anyways. The current, updated enactment of meeting attendance regulations. The current bylaw, student Senate attendance regulation, only briefly defined attendance for Senate meeting. The current bylaw is outdated, and a new proposed bylaw is to define Senate meeting, executive cabinet meeting, and the state association meeting. So to start off, this is a replacement of Chapter 3, which is student Senate attendance regulations. Now moving on to the proposed bylaw. The first section, establishment. This chapter, in conjunction with ASUCR Constitution, shall govern the meeting attendance in state association meetings, Senate meetings, and executive cabinet meetings. ASUCR committee meetings attendance shall be regulated by each respective bylaw.
Is there any amendments? Are there any discussions? Move on to the next section.
Section 2, definition. The executive branch representative is defined by Article 4, Section 8 of the Constitution. The legislative branch representative and Senate staff is defined by Article 5, Section 8 of the Constitution.
Are there any amendments? Any discussion? You may proceed. Sorry, it's hard.
Section 3, the State Association. The State Association is a joint meeting between both executive branch and legislative branch, which occurs every 3 weeks. The joint meeting replaces the Senate meeting during the particular month. The joint meeting shall be chaired by the Executive Vice President. In the absence of the Executive Vice President, the President pro tempore shall chair the meeting. The State Association requires Executive Branch Representative, Legislative Branch Representative, and Senate staff to be present through the entirety of the meeting. The Executive Vice President shall request a written or oral report from each Executive Branch Representative and a representative for each college that will present on the college's behalf.
Any amendments? Any discussion? Proceed.
Section 4, Executive Cabinet Meeting. The Executive Cabinet Meeting is a meeting between all of the Executive Branch members. The meeting shall be chaired by the President. In the absence of the President, the Executive Vice President shall chair the meeting. The Executive Cabinet Meeting requires all Executive Branch representatives, parliamentarian, and Senate secretaries to be present throughout the entirety of the meeting. The President shall request a written or oral report from the Executive Branch representative. Okay.
Are there any amendments? We're actually checking on a constitution. I believe it says that quorum for executive cabinet members, there is 3 out of 5 members. So can we amend that?
Sure, but it's stated in the Constitution.
So it's just, yeah, so.
The Constitution will always supersede, but this makes us have a bylaws.
but it does include also might as well just include for a Senate meeting as well.
So, can we amend that it be 3 of the 5? Oh, just. Oh, okay. Can we remove all then? Just the word
Sure.
all? Okay.
In that case,
Oh, that's not the right one. Okay. Are there any other amendments? Discussion? Moving on to the next section.
Section 5, Senate meeting. Senate meeting is a meeting between all of the legislative branch members with the presence of Senate staff. The meeting shall be chaired by the Executive Vice President in the absence of the Executive Vice Presidents. The President pro tempore shall chair the meeting. Senate meeting requires all legislative branch representatives, parliamentarian, and Senate Secretary to be present throughout the entirety of the meeting. The Executive Vice President shall request a written or report from the legislative branch representative. So in this case, you might have to just change the quorum for Senate. Instead of all representatives
Oh,
to
okay.
for consistency between section 4.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other amendments? Any discussion? Proceed.
Section 6, attendance regulation. All state association meeting attendance shall be regulated by Article 5, Section 8 of the Constitution. All executive meeting attendance shall be regulated by Article 4, Section G of the Constitution. All Senate meeting attendance shall be regulated by Article 5, Section 8 of the Constitution.
Perfect. Are there any other questions or amendments to the last section? Any discussion? No?
Actually, before that, please go back to Section 3 of the State Association. Perhaps we might be able to change that instead of all, specifying the quorum for legislative branch.
Got it. Requires. Oh, it doesn't say all.
Okay.
So you're good. Okay. Are there any other amendments? Any discussion? Would you like to do the honors? Do you have any discussion on the whole thing? No? Would you like to do the honors?
I move. What?
No. Keep on going. You're fine.
I move to adopt the proposed bylaw as a substitute for Chapter 3 Student Senate Attendance Regulations, the present bylaws.
Seconded by Senator Cortez Hernandez. Are there any debate? Nope. We'll move this into a vote. All in favor? All in favor. Okay. All opposed? Any abstentions? No. Thank you. With a vote of 11-0-0, motion passes. Moving on to the next item, which is Senate Bill number 18, General Amendments to Chapter 7. These you do not have to go over the entirety.
Since the previous bill was to change both director to civil engagement director as discussed at the last Senate meeting. However, they were not change. However, the changes were not made for the Office of External Affairs on the top first section. For that, did I do go there this morning?
No.
Okay. So many of these are a lot of name changes, such as Highlander Vote Coalition to Civic Engagement Committee. And now instead of Legislative Affairs, they have renamed it to Government Relations. Now they added a additional director called Community Director, and changing vote director to Civic Engagement. Many of these are to more be consistent with the current operations and for name changes.
Move to approve the bylaw change.
There's a motion on the table by Senator Cole. Is there a second?
I second.
Seconded by Senator Jimenez. We'll move this into a debate. Are there any debate on this topic? Nope. We'll move this into a vote. All in favor? All opposed? Any abstains? With a vote of 11-0-0, motion passes. Moving on to the next item, which is General Amendments to Chapter 2. Oh, my bad.
Oh,
8, it says.
Okay. Actually, before we start, do you mind changing the ASUCR hereby amends Chapter 8 instead of 12? Well, like the bold statement. So the amendments is general amendments to Chapter 8 are to be consistent with the recent change on voter director to voter director and Chief Justice due to annual budget change in the previous Senate session. The remaining amendments are removing abbreviations.
What change did you want?
The ASUCR Senate hereby amend Chapter 12 instead of actually Chapter 8.
Good.
We just vote quickly and then we just. Okay, to change vote director to